Berardi Immigration Law is a great resource for the latest in immigration news and trends. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel. It really helps out the channel. And click that notification bell so you never miss a video from Berardi Immigration Law.
Today, on Tuesday, September 12th, USCIS has issued some clarifying guidance in its policy manual for EB-1 employment first-based preference applicants. This guidance impacts two subcategories of the EB-1, individuals with extraordinary ability, the EB-1A, and outstanding professors or researchers, the EB-1B. The EB-1A is reserved for those with extraordinary ability in arts, sciences, education, business, or athletics. To qualify, the applicant has to show that they have sustained national or international acclaim. These achievements have to be evidenced by lots of documentation, and USCIS sets forth a pretty stringent bullet point list. So an applicant has to show that they demonstrate 3 of 10 listed criteria, like authorship in scholarly articles or membership in certain associations. Similarly, the EB-1B for outstanding researchers and professors also require applicants to demonstrate international recognition for achievements in their particular academic field. The EB-1B isn't quite as high as the EB-1A, but an applicant does have to check off 2 of the 6 listed criteria and show how they stand apart in the academic community. For both the EB-1A and EB-1B categories, however, the government does allow for what we call comparable evidence to be submitted. So, what's notable about this new policy update is that USCIS has provided extra guidance and examples of the type of evidence that might satisfy that stringent criteria. So they're giving direction to USCIS officers on how they should consider the comparable evidence, particularly with a focus on those in STEM fields. This is significant because the new guidance provides more clarity and transparency for applicants and petitioners. This will help applicants submit the appropriate evidence and show that they are eligible.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like our video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit that notification button so you never miss one of these important updates. Also, check out the Berardi blog that's on our website at berardiimmigrationlaw.com. The blog is updated 2 to 3 times a week, contains tons of up-to-date information on policies and trends. You won't want to miss it.